Well then, today, on this Thursday, we are talking about the recent hotfix changes launched in this new reset, which include more, yes, even more nerfs to Mythic Dungeons, as well as hotfixes to a few different specs, which turn out basically to be buffs, pretty much, as well as one more change to one particular meme trinket. Now, talking about the one that affects everyone is, of course, the changes to the dungeons, starting from Cinderbrew Meadery. Now, funnily enough, Cinderbrew Meadery at the moment is one of the more likely to be completed dungeon. It's also one of the more run dungeon due to some of the quite good trinkets dropping from this place. However, it does get one nerf. The nerf in particular will likely make tanks very happy because Bank Busby, so the bee boss, either the second or the third one, depending on your order, on your pathing, has honey marinade aerial denial damage reduced by 33%. This is, interesting in the sense that this ability, which is the one that gets put on the tank and then after 5 seconds drops a pool on the ground, so tanks make sure that you place this after 5 seconds to the corners of the room so you don't fill up the room with lava, which isn't that big of an issue for the players stepping in the lava, but because if you defeat the bees and the bees touch the lava, they become full HP again and you have to kill them again. So it's nice to bring the lava to the corners of the room. In this case, this change is just reducing the extra damage that players that are still inside the circle are going to take. This is not just specifically for the tank taking less damage from this ability, but rather, generally speaking, from the melee brains staying within the circle and taking the damage that the tank is supposed to be taking. Luckily, hopefully, this will create fewer random deaths of players unaware of this quite visible circle, honestly, around the tank. Beyond that, there are no other changes to Meadery. What also gets nerfed is the Motherlode, in particular Azarok, the second boss of the dungeon. The big thing about this boss is that he summons 2 adds, and then he empowers one of them. That one starts ticking for a lot of AoE damage across all players, and you have to kill him rather quickly, otherwise the damage gets pretty hard to heal, and then he also does a big large AoE. Now, this add is going to chase players, and it should be a good idea to kite around, because when you get hit by the add, you get a dot that can stack and make you take tons of damage. Now, the nerf for this encounter is that the initial aftershock damage from the add getting empowered is reduced by 23%, and more importantly, the Azarok's adds Azerite aftershock periodic damage has been reduced by 43%. This was basically the dangerous combo, which would also start to become quite visible in higher level keys when the mobs have more HP, and it started to kill this quickly, which is the combo of the boss himself doing his own AoE while this add is still alive. This empowered add is still alive. When that happens, on top of the pulsing AoE damage you were taking from the add, on top of the AoE damage you're about to take from the boss is also going to empower the add to make you take even more damage. That's what is being nerfed by 43%, the 5-second long ticking AoE damage of the add that gets empowered basically by the boss's AoE. Now, hopefully, you would rather have wanted to have this add dead before the boss casts his AoE, but even if that were to happen, now this AoE from the empowered add has been nerfed by 43%, which is quite a large nerf. What is also a large nerf, but also not that relevant, is the nerf to the Rookery. Now, the Rookery is a reasonably easy dungeon right now. It's quite free at the moment, and this nerf is not going to make it any freer because it's not supposed to happen. This entire situation is not supposed to happen. The Voidstone Monstrosity's add, the Voidstone Awakened, has a ticking AoE damage. Now, the reason why you don't know about this is because you likely never even saw this add. What happens with this add is that it spawns after 15 seconds if nobody stays with their Storm Rider's charge circle that you use that circle to destroy the Voidstone fragment. If nobody uses that circle to break the fragment within 15 seconds, then the add is going to spawn. And the ad was basically wiping your group because it was sticking for a lot of AoE damage. That is what is getting nerfed now. Now, this sticking AoE damage that you generate if you fail the mechanic and spawn the ad has been nerfed by 50%. The damage increase per stack has been reduced by 50%. As I said, it's not that relevant because this should basically never happen in this dungeon and in this encounter, so it's not gonna make the dungeon any easier if you were doing your mechanics and not making this ad spawn. On the same level of uselessness as this Rookery change, you have the one to Floodgate, at least one of the two, because the second one is a very good change, but the first one is the one to Big Mama Maximum Distortion. Now, Maximum Distortion, you might remember it only because you heard or saw any warnings about interrupting the ability. This is the ad, the mecha chopper thingies that get spawned by the boss, and they cast this Maximum Distortion, which is just a ticking AoE damage that knocks players back, and it's very, very bad when that happens. So the basically QOL change here is that now it takes 4 seconds for the ability to cast, so it's easier to interrupt, and then the duration is reduced to lasting for 12 seconds instead of 14, which is completely irrelevant, of course, because if you have a group that lets this cast go on for 12 seconds, you are basically all getting disconnected. There is no other way you let the ads do that in the first place. The only, I guess, decent one is to make the cast longer. Make it 4 seconds instead of 3 to make it easier for you to have time, maybe have your interrupt cooldowns coming back in time to get these casts to not go off in this first boss. But the real change, the real good one for the Floodgate is, of course, the one after that. Swamp Phase has already been nerfed previously. The waves, the water waves, were already slowed by 37%, making them easier to dodge. Now there is another pretty good change. Have you ever wondered why during that dodging intermission you were sweating your ass off, you and your DPS comrades, and then the tank was just chilling there? You were being tied, you were being tethered together with a bunch of other actually useful players, while the tank was doing absolutely nothing, with not a care in the world, not even having to care about their movement whatsoever. Well, Blizzard is finally paying attention to this, and the change to Floodgate is that now Swamp Phase chains are going to target no longer the healers. So now the chains are going to go DPS, DPS, and DPS and tank. And the healer is now free to go wherever he wants and heal however he wants without having to worry about staying tied to a DPS, which is a very good change since it's already a healing intensive enough moment. The healer also having to worry about following this guy tied to him, which might put him into even more danger if you're not on the same page on where you want to dodge. It's definitely helpful since, as mentioned, it's not that the tank is doing much in that period, so you might as well tether the tank to a DPS and let the healer free in that moment. These are all of the changes to the dungeons, 4 different dungeons, the biggest one of course being the one to Floodgate, and then followed up by Motherlode. The ones to Rookery and Meadery are not that relevant. The DPS are not supposed to step into Honey Marinade, and in the Rookery you're not supposed to spawn the ad, so those 2 changes are rather forgettable. Now, about the hotfixes given to specs. Now, one had already been fixed, which was the one to Beast Mastery Hunters and their Dire Beasts and Pack Leader Beasts spawning basically disappearing if the ad was on hard to reach locations, terrain, textures, and your pets will just disappear or simply not reach the boss and AFK in place. This has already been fixed. The other change, this was just a mistake in typing. Probably Elemental Shaman for a brief period was doing 17% less damage because Blizzard changed some tuning with PvP spells, but forgot to only keep it for PvP spells, and as a result, all of the kit of Shaman was doing less damage, almost 20% less damage. This has already been fixed. The more relevant of the hotfixes has been the long since bugged 4 and 2, or just general tier set of Discipline. The Insurance Healing of the Discipline Priest set bonus, which will net up to be a buff. Now, I know you're weirded out wondering why is Discipline being buffed in the first place. Well, as I said, it was a bug. It wasn't working to begin with because the Insurance Healing of Discipline, because of how Atonement works, was practically constantly proccing on the Discipline Priest player itself. and overwriting itself and basically being a lot of overhealing and a lot of useless healing. And that's because whenever you proc something with Atonement, the effect would always go on the first player healed by Atonement. And the first player healed by Atonement is always the priest, is always the one creating the Atonement. So even if you had 17 players with Atonement, you use Smite. Smite heals 17 players. The first player down the line to be healed is always you, the priest. So every time your tier set would proc from these 17 Atonement healing events, it would always go on the first one, which was the priest, meaning a lot of overhealing and wasted power of this tier set. This is what is being fixed now. Now your 2-piece will apply insurance, not basically always to the priest, which should be a 2 to 3, maybe even 4% healing increase for discipline. There's also been a slight nerf though, because this is also a hotfix, is on a similar note to what arcane mages have been dealing with things like nether precision or even burden of power, which is the spell queuing. Benefiting from a buff twice because you are casting something, and then by the end of the cast, in the spell queue window at the end of the cast, you charge up, you prop up, you queue an instacast spell. So you could be doing something like Frostbolt into Ice Lance, or things like Chaos Bolt into Conflagrate, or things like Lava Burst into Flame Shock. All these instances where both spells are cast at the same time, because one is casted, one is channeled, and the other is instant, you will be able to benefit from a single buff twice. This would work, as I mentioned, with the things for Mage, and it was also working for Wheel and Woe. The talent of Discipline being able to benefit a casted spell, Smite, and an instant spell, Power Shield. So you were able to use Penance to get this buff up and then do Smite into Power Shield to benefit both from the damage increase of Smite and the Absorb Shield of Power Shield. This has now been removed. This is a rather pointless change in the raid because you weren't really min-maxing to this effect while raiding anyways. In Mythic Plus it's more relevant. Now in Mythic Plus it is still more worth to benefit from Wheel and Woe on your Absorb Shield, not really on the damage increase on your Smite, unless it's happening right as some big AoE damage is coming. If that is not happening, then use still the Wheel and Woe buff on an Absorb Shield to prepare for some big chunky single target damage nukes going the way of yourself or of your DPS or even the tank anyways. So this is the other hotfix change going the way of Discipline, which will end up, as mentioned, being a tiny 2, 3, maybe 4% healing buff for the spec in the raid. Now, the last one is the change to the meme Trinket, the Amorphous Relic, which has been buffed by a significant large number, 148% secondary stat buff and 106% primary stat buff. Now this was one of the curios you could put on Bran last season, which has since then been turned into a Trinket. Now, as a TLDR, this is basically Ovinak's Egg Trinket from last season, except you now get max stacks of the secondary stat for 30 seconds and then max stacks of the primary stat for 30 seconds. And then you alternate between the max stacks of your secondary and then your primary and secondary and primary stat. That's basically how this Trinket works, except it was really terrible because even at these max stacks, the max primary stat was still smaller than, for example, the Ovinak's Egg, and even the secondary stat was smaller than the secondary stat given to you by the Ovinak's Egg anyways. Now with this change, with this practically more than doubling the stats on this Trinket, it has actually turned out to be a reasonably okay Trinket for some specs. For some of the specs now going down simming this Trinket, you should probably check it out yourself as well if it is still worth going, like quite a few other specs still going into delves right now, getting your bountiful coffer keys, trying to get some maps to loot some of these Trinket at a higher item level, because quite a few of them are still very good for many specs. And now this Trinket is also getting slightly better. It's still not apparently one of the more sought after of these delve trinkets, like for example the Funhouse Lens for 90-second cooldown specs or the Suspicious Energy Drink, but it is likely now quite a good deal better than it was before. So these were all of the changes for this last round of quick hotfixes launched. Already live. All of this, by the way, everything we just mentioned has been going live today already. So whenever you log in, these will all already be part of this current week in the season 2 of The War Within. So with this update, we're now gone and done for this Thursday. We might have any more changes this Friday. Usually that's when Blizzard launches any more tuning, for example, either Friday before the weekend or on Tuesday, on reset day in NA. So maybe tomorrow we'll get something more corpus, especially for spec tuning, more so than just dungeon tuning and hotfixes. But for today, on this Thursday, this is all we can talk about on this morning. This is the first time since 1974 that I'm awake and making videos at 10, 11, even AM. This is crazy. So we are now leaving each other, thanking, of course, everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, you know, I kind of like the sun, but maybe I should have oriented the room a little bit better to not have this extinction level event every time in my back view.